How was your day? Let's continue with the next episode. Put on your headphones and join me in watching the next part of the episode, The Devil in Red. If you find it interesting, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that Nightmare Ones can be more complete. Thank you for listening. And next, I will not keep you waiting any longer. Let's get started. When the ivory white moonlight hung above the bamboo, the chirping of the frogs gradually stopped. The art troupe scattered and each went their separate ways back home. Kong saw Trang walking alone and wanted to flirt with her. But suddenly a pair of very heavy hands pinned Kong down and dragged him into the bushes. He did not see the person behind him, but he had the feeling that although the person was thin, she was very strong. He shouted, "Who is it? Who is dragging me?" But there was no sound of kicking back. The other hand disappeared. He stood up in confusion, but saw no one. Looking towards the end of the village road, Trang had gradually disappeared at the end of the field. Perhaps Kong wanted to chase after her but couldn't catch up. He stomped his feet and cursed before leaving, still feeling confused. At the entrance of the village, Trang had just cycled past Mrs. Han's tea shop. Mr. Look was lying cross-legged on a hammock, sighing as he looked out at the village road. He saw her passing by. He immediately jumped up and ran out to block the road. Trang was surprised when she saw Mr. Luke blocking her way and asked, "Uncle Luck, what are you doing?" Mr. Luck opened his eyes and said, "Tell Duan, if you don't let my father and I stay, then every time you come here, you won't be able to handle it with me." Old Luck was afraid that his attempt to threaten Duan would not work, so when he heard that Duan and Trang had feelings for each other, he immediately wanted to use Trang as bait to scare Duan. He threatened for a while, then let Trang go. Trang was breathing heavily in fear and did not dare to stay long. She suddenly remembered that she had to go see Duan to explain, and took the opportunity to tell him about the matter of old Luke causing trouble with her. From the beginning of the village road, turn left through a cemetery, then past a duckweed pond to reach Duan's house. Trang's house is in the opposite direction from Duan's house. This village has 3 roads connecting to each other. The convergence of the 3 village roads is where Mrs. Han's tea shop is. When arriving at Duan's house, suddenly an owl swooped down from somewhere. It landed in front of Duan's house. It stared at Trang, not making a sound or moving. It seemed like it wanted to guard this house, not to cause trouble. Another black shadow flew by, and another owl appeared. In its claws was a very large rat, the size of a cat. The rat squealed loudly like a pig. Its squealing made Trang's legs go weak. Suddenly, the owl swooped into Mrs. Kum's room and threw the rat in there. The rat's squealing immediately stopped. The owl staggered and flew out in fear, landed next to the fence, and looked at Trang curiously. Trang shook her head for a moment, then cleared her mind of the image she had just seen. She raised her voice and exclaimed, "Mr. Duan, Mr. Duan, are you home? This is Trang." Trang called twice. The door opened, the lights turned on. Duan rushed out of the house like a rocket. Seeing Trang park the car outside the gate, Duan said, "Trang? Why are you here at this hour?" Page pouting. "You still ask me that question? Are you going to invite me for a drink?" Duan woke up, hurriedly opened the gate, and invited Trang into the house. Trang led her bicycle into the yard, put the bike on the stand, then walked over to the bamboo stall and lit a pot of tea as naturally as if it were her own home. While making tea, Trang said, "Just now I saw an owl carrying a big rat. It grabbed it and threw it into my grandmother's room. Hurry up and go in and see, or the rat will destroy everything in there." After hearing that, Duan panicked and ran into Mr. Kum's room to check. But it seemed like he was asleep. His back was turned to the wall, and his breathing was gentle. Trang also looked in to see. Seeing that nothing was wrong, she breathed a sigh of relief and said, "That mouse must have run outside. I was so scared when I saw the owl it threw at me. I was worried that something would happen to him. Even looking at that rat scared me to death." Seeing Duan absent-minded, his eyes still filled with sadness, Trang immediately pinched Duan's arm, making him scream in pain. "Whose pain? Why did you pinch my hand?" Trang rolled her eyes and said, "Why did you look at me last night and then leave? Did you misunderstand me again?" Duan smiled happily and asked, "So you were teasing me, I thought." Trang pulled Duan's hand to signal silence so that Mr. Kam could continue sleeping. She said absent-mindedly, "My dad doesn't want me to see you, so in crowded places I have to pretend not to notice." Trang suddenly changed the subject to ask about Mr. Cam. "But you seem to like wearing red, don't you? Every night I cycle past here, I see you wearing red. Do you often cycle here?" Duan asked in surprise. Trang nodded. "From the day you were taken to the district, I brought food over every day. But it only lasted for 2 days. Because every time I brought food over, she didn't eat it. The rice was rotten from the night before and hadn't been touched. So from the next day, I didn't bring it over anymore because I thought someone else had brought food for her. After that, when I had free time, I only went over to see how she was doing." Duan suddenly choked with tears because Trang was so nice to him. Trang saw Duan staring at her and blushed slightly. In the quiet space, the two gradually moved closer to each other. Duan gingerly held Trang's hand. Trang pretended not to know what was going on and let Duan do it. Both of their faces were red. The shy atmosphere enveloped them both, making them silent. Suddenly, Trang remembered that it was late and she could not stay too long. She interrupted to remind Duan, "Just now, I was passing by the village entrance. Mr. Luke blocked my way and threatened me. He said if you don't let him in, he will cause trouble. It sounds like Mr. Luck wants to cause trouble. You have to be careful. From tomorrow on, I will take the back road to avoid Miss Han's tea shop. I won't see Mr. Luck anymore." Hearing that, Duan's face turned pale with anger. Trang felt Duan's hand tighten, even clutching hers. She cried out, "You hold my hand so painfully." Duan quickly let go of his hand, stammering, "I'm sorry. I'm so angry with Mr. Luck." Trang bowed her head and said, "It's late. I have to go home, or my dad will scold me." Trang led the bike out of the gate and was out of sight. Duan sighed and went inside the house to turn off the lights and go to sleep. Before going to sleep, Duan had to check on Mrs. Thotcom's room to see if she was okay. The night returned to silence. Mr. Cam turned to lie on his side facing the door. In his mouth, the rat was still struggling. It was still alive, only that Mr. Cam had bitten it so hard on the throat that it could not make a sound. At the entrance of the village, old Luke was fanning himself with a palm leaf fan. Suddenly, he raised his hand to cover his neck and cried out. At this hour, Mrs. Han had returned home. At the tea shop at the beginning of the village, only Old Luck and his son remained. The tea shop had been borrowed by Old Luck from Mrs. Han to temporarily stay overnight. Ba saw Old Luck struggling, so he shook his arm and asked, "Dad, what's wrong?" Mr. Luck tried to say each word. "I don't know why. It feels like someone is stabbing a knife into my neck. My head feels like it's going to explode. My neck feels like it's going to cut me off." As soon as Lao Luk finished speaking, unexpectedly, his head immediately fell to the ground. Blood sprayed from his neck into the sky. Ba screamed in terror and fainted. Lao Luk died before him, a very terrifying death. Something had crushed his neck so hard that he couldn't react in time and died on the spot. In Mr. Cam's room, the rat's head fell to the ground. Mr. Cam's cold eyes looked into the distance, as if trying to see through the wooden door. Blood was splattered everywhere on the ground, and the stench was strong. The rat's intestines were hanging out. In the strangely quiet space, Ba's scream was like a heart-chilling sound. It made people shiver and wake up. Someone lit a torch and ran towards the direction of the scream. When they discovered that old Luke's head and body were in different directions, their limbs went limp. More and more people appeared and gathered. They had to temporarily use a piece of thin mat to cover old Luck's body and head to avoid being shocked. Ba was lifted under the armpits to lie on the bed, and then his philtrum was pressed. After massaging that point for a while, Ba woke up. He had tears in his eyes and begged the villagers like a madman. "Uncles, please save my dad. Please save my dad." It sounded like Ba was panicking, talking non-stop. People tried to persuade him, but to no avail. He kept muttering that his father's head had suddenly been severed. His father cried out in pain, and then his head fell off. At first, no one believed it, but then someone had the courage to open the mat and look at the marks on Mr. Luke's neck. And then they believed that what Ba said was true. This village had been peaceful for a long time, and it wasn't in the middle of nowhere, so there couldn't be wild animals. But Mr. Luke's neck had been torn apart, as if something had torn it off. It was like when someone bit off a piece of flesh and tore it apart. A machete couldn't have made such a terrible mark. Everyone was talking, and someone who had heard strange stories from all over told them, "I heard that in a certain village there is a demon that appears and kills people like flies. The villagers do not dare to go out at night. Instead, the demon eats animals alive. People must find its hiding place and kill it to end the problem." That's a possessed demon. No one in this village has just died. How could there be a possessed demon? And possessed demons are the kind that kill people when they're sleeping. But according to the boy, his father's head suddenly fell off. Or is there a spell? Nonsense. Our village is not a mountainous area, so there is no way to have wormwood. And even if there was wormwood, there would be no sorcerer to perform magic. Moreover, Mr. Luke and his son did not have any grudge against anyone, to the extent that they would let someone use wormwood to kill them so brutally. Even if the family lost the lottery and was forced to pay debts, that would be the end of it. There were countless discussions and speculations about Mr. Luke's death. But most people talked more about ghosts because Mr. Luck's death was truly very strange. People took pity on Luck and buried him in the field. After Luck's funeral, only Ba was left alone. Ba had no place to stay, so he wandered around the village. He had also dropped out of school, and he had no relatives except Duan. He remembered his half-brother, so he went to Duan's house to ask to stay. When he arrived, Duan was not home. He was so hungry that he ventured into the house to find something to eat. He was unfamiliar with the house, so he just walked around randomly and unexpectedly went into Mrs. Cam's room. There was no one in Mrs. Cam's room. He didn't know where Mrs. Cam had gone. Ba searched everywhere, from the wooden cabinet where Mrs. Cam kept her clothes, to under the bed, under the table. Then he suddenly discovered a red box with a golden happy character on it. In the countryside, there are some places where people often have a box to store the wedding gifts of a couple after their wedding, kept for many years. Perhaps this was the wedding box kept from when Mrs. Cam was young. Ba was so curious and hungry that he wanted to search everything, so he opened the box wide. Inside the box was a red dress, probably Mrs. Cam's old wedding dress. The strange thing was that even though the dress had been around for many years, its color was still very bright. He must have kept it very carefully. Next, something round emerged from under the red shirt. Ba lifted the red shirt and unexpectedly discovered something horrifying. He covered his mouth with his hand and ran out the door in terror. Just as he reached the edge of the door, a hand suddenly reached out from under the bed and grabbed Ba's leg, causing him to fall to the ground. Ba shouted, "Help!" It was dragged into the middle of the room. The late sunset sky was fading. Darkness was falling over this land, signaling the appearance of demons. Ba panicked and struggled. He looked around and saw no one, but clearly his legs were tightly grabbed by invisible hands. His whole body was dragged towards the box. He understood that if he could not escape, the result would be very similar to the things inside the red box. The darker the sky, the brighter the hurricane lamp in the room. Ba was dragged under the bed. He saw a pair of skinny legs sticking out from above the bed. Through the dim light of the hurricane lamp, the legs did not cast any shadows. People often rumored that ghosts do not cast any shadows. If you doubted who was a ghost, just look at whether that person had a shadow or not. Ba suddenly remembered what his classmates whispered to each other. People had a habit of bending their heads down to look through their crotch. At that time, if there was a ghost behind them, they would definitely recognize it. Ba trembled, spread his legs, and slowly looked through. His crotch was wet and leaking liquid. He gasped when he realized that the person grabbing his legs was Mr. Cam. Mr. Cam only had a pair of hands attached to a head that looked extremely strange. Mr. Cam smiled and stared straight into Ba's eyes. Ba's mouth was twisted, and he was screaming for help. At this moment, the sound of a bicycle chain rang out outside the gate. Duan had returned. He was still holding a fish in his hand. Duan looked around and saw that the gate was open today and that Mr. Kum's room seemed to have been ransacked by someone. Duan immediately ran into Mr. Kum's room. He saw Mr. Kum sitting there, chewing betel and smiling as usual. He seemed happier than usual. Without waiting for Duan to ask, Mr. Kum spoke up. "The father and son are all dead, about to die." Hearing what Mr. Cam said, Duan sighed and sat down on the bed to talk to him. Yes, sir. Old Luke is dead. Ba has been wandering around all day. I came home after work and couldn't find him. Poor thing. I wonder if he's had dinner yet. Ba heard Duan's voice, but he couldn't speak. His mouth was tightly held by a hand, preventing him from making any sound for help. He reached out to shake Duan's leg, but Duan's leg was at the head of the bed, and his hand was at the foot of the bed, so he couldn't reach it. He immediately thought of a way. He wrote words on the ground under the light of the hurricane lamp. Duan might not be able to see them for the time being, but he would definitely see the words on the ground at some point. When Duan had just finished his monologue with Mrs. Cum, he stood up and was about to go out. Suddenly his face showed a look of shock. On the ground were a few words. I am Ba, I am locked under the bed. Mrs. Cum is a ghost, save me. Seeing Duan standing there, Mr. Cam suddenly said, They will all die, sooner or later. If they make my grandchild suffer, they will all die. Hearing these words from Mr. Cam, Duan suddenly remembered what had happened and felt a chill down his spine. The death of Mrs. Diem, the death of Mr. Look, both were related to Duan's resentment, and both had extremely horrible deaths. Duan did not believe what the writing mentioned, but also wanted to know if there was really someone under that bed. He distracted Mr. Cam and said, Grandma, I cook very fast. Go take a shower and then we can eat. Old Cam nodded toothlessly and walked away. As soon as Old Cam was out of sight, Duan lowered his head and saw Ba crawling out from under the bed. Ba shouted and grabbed Duan's hand. Run! Don't die now. Ba insisted on pulling Duan's hand, afraid that he would be discovered if he went through the main gate, so he dragged Duan around the path behind the house. Unexpectedly, he made Duan witness a terrifying scene. Old Man Cam came to the edge of the old well and suddenly jumped into the well. Duan intended to rush to save Old Man Cam, but Ba grabbed his hand and ran away. Ba said, Don't go there, she's a real ghost. Have you ever seen anyone fall down a well without making a sound? Duan still did not believe it. He pulled Ba's hand away and was about to go to the well to examine it. But just as Duan was about to do so, he was stunned to see Mr. Cum standing at the front of the house staring at him. He said, I finished bathing. Can I eat now? Duan shivered. He saw Mr. Cum turn his face to look at Ba. He suddenly coldly pointed at Ba's face and said, You will die. Ba immediately pulled Duan's hand and ran away, his face pale to the point of losing all blood. Duan was absent-minded and let Ba pull his hand. Not knowing how long they had been running, Ba stopped and said, I guess I can't escape death. Duan asked, Why do you say that? Seeing Duan standing there, Mr. Cam suddenly said, They will all die, sooner or later. If they make my grandchild suffer, they will all die. Hearing these words from Mr. Cam, Duan suddenly remembered what had happened and felt a chill down his spine. The death of Mrs. Diem, the death of Mr. Look, both were related to Duan's resentment, and both had extremely horrible deaths. Duan did not believe what the writing mentioned, but also wanted to know if there was really someone under that bed. He distracted Mr. Cam and said, Grandma, I cook very fast. Go take a shower and then we can eat. Old Cam nodded toothlessly and walked away. As soon as Old Cam was out of sight, Duan lowered his head and saw Ba crawling out from under the bed. Ba shouted and grabbed Duan's hand. Run! Don't die now. Ba insisted on pulling Duan's hand, afraid that he would be discovered if he went through the main gate, so he dragged Duan around the path behind the house. Unexpectedly, he made Duan witness a terrifying scene. Old Man Cam came to the edge of the old well and suddenly jumped into the well. Duan intended to rush to save Old Man Cam, but Ba grabbed his hand and ran away. Ba said, Don't go there, she's a real ghost. Have you ever seen anyone fall down a well without making a sound? Duan still did not believe it. He pulled Ba's hand away and was about to go to the well to examine it. But just as Duan was about to do so, he was stunned to see Mr. Cum standing at the front of the house staring at him. He said, I finished bathing. Can I eat now? Duan shivered. He saw Mr. Cum turn his face to look at Ba. He suddenly coldly pointed at Ba's face and said, You will die. Ba immediately pulled Duan's hand and ran away, his face pale to the point of losing all blood. Duan was absent-minded and let Ba pull his hand. Not knowing how long they had been running, Ba stopped and said, I guess I can't escape death. Duan asked, Why do you say that? Oh my gosh, Who butchered buffalo and cow here and left brains and blood all over the place? I have to ask which butcher bought the tripe. It's really good to drink wine with. Mr. Han was a drunkard and had blurred vision, so he mistook the blood on the road for people killing cattle and buffalo and couldn't think deeper. While preparing to continue cycling, Mr. Han was stopped by a call. Uncle Han. Uncle Han, are you free? I invite you over for a drink. The person calling from afar was Kong. After hearing that, Mr. Han immediately drove towards Kong to talk. He asked, "Is that work? Oh my God, call your father-in-law. Tomorrow I will marry my daughter to you. We can drink together every day." The man scratched his head and ears. "Stop joking with me. Trang doesn't like me." Mr. Han opened his eyes wide. "Are you worried about Dun again? That poor guy is not worthy of my daughter. Tomorrow I will come over to his house and give him a good beating. If he dares to come near Trang again, I will stab him to death." He was very happy but pretended not to believe. "Oh well, tomorrow when you sober up, you'll forget right away." Mr. Han affirmed, "I have a pair of new gold bracelets I just bought for my mother at home. Take them as a guarantee. If I don't come over tomorrow to scold Dun, you can take them and spend them." Kong then burst out laughing and took the pair of gold bracelets. Then he dragged Mr. Han to his house to eat and drink. Dun was very angry after hearing this, but suddenly remembered what Ba had said before he died. Anyone who appeared near Dun's house and had a conflict with him would be harmed by Mr. Kung. If Mr. Han really came to Dun's house tomorrow, his life would be in danger. Dun immediately thought of how to stop Mr. Han. After burying Ba, Dun went to Trang's house. He wanted to tell Trang the whole story, but when he arrived at Trang's house, he stopped and hesitated, because what he was about to say was too absurd. Would Trang believe him, or would she think he was crazy? He then turned to Kong's house and thought of another way. When he arrived at Kong's house, he was drinking and chatting with Mr. Han when Dun barged in. When Kong saw Dun coming, he immediately stood up and asked, "What are you doing here?" He still remembered Dun's punch the day before, so he was very cautious. He thought that Dun had come here to find him to cause trouble. Contrary to Kong's thoughts, Dun lowered his voice, looked at Mr. Han and said, "Yes, Uncle Han, today I want to come here to tell you something. About Trang and I." Mr. Han threw the cup on the ground, breaking it, then angrily said, "A guy like you with an elephant head and a mouse tail is worthy of my daughter?" Dun tried to suppress his anger and said, "I know that too, so today I also want to inform you. I will never see Trang again. I just need you not to come to my house to bother me. I'm afraid the villagers will gossip. My relatives are old. I'm afraid they can't stand the gossip." Mr. Han nodded with satisfaction. "If you say so, then why should I make things difficult for you?" Dun said, "Thank you, Uncle. I've bothered you with a drink." Dun turned around and walked away. Mr. Sahon patted Kong on the shoulder and said, "So tomorrow I won't have to go to his house to curse anymore. Give me back the gold bracelets." Mr. Han held out his hand to ask for it, still praising. "That guy is as stupid as a cow, but he knows how to be smart." Kong's eyes kept rolling. He hated Dun for stealing Trang's feelings, stealing Trang from him. Who would want things to end so easily? He had to humiliate Dun to feel satisfied. If necessary, he would let Mr. Rakam hear this news in case he suddenly fell down and died. Dun would have to accept a bitter ending. Kong thought about taking revenge on Dun so happily that he did not respond to Mr. Han's request to get back the gold bracelets. He said, "No, you promised. How can you go back on your word? Today, if she sweet-talks you, you let her go. Tomorrow, if she flatters you a little more, you'll marry Trang to her. But who knows, what she said might be true. What if she cheats on you and secretly meets Trang again, and the rice becomes rice? At that time, who can I go to make her pay? You should go to her house and scold her until she's ashamed. Then she won't dare to meet your daughter again. That way, you'll be sure." Mr. Han was impressed, thinking that Kong's words were correct.